Hi, my name is Lynn Stanley, and I'm the Curator of Education at the Provincetown Art Association and Museum. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's Fredi, Schiff, Levin event, the first of the season, a panel discussion with co-curators Ethan Cohen and Jane Paradise, artist Ray Elman, and Executive Director Christine McCarthy, in conjunction with the exhibition Elman Holt, The Outer Cape Art Colony, on view at PAM through August 7th, 2016. This lecture series was begun in 2003 in honor of the artist Fredi Schiff Levin, who was a member of Provincetown's arts community from the 1960s until her passing in 2002. Pam gratefully acknowledges John and Tony Levin, who make this program possible with their generous support. We'd also like to thank Provincetown Community Television for their support of this lecture series, and Liz Lavati of Angel Foods for her continued support. The photographer Norma Holt was born in 1918 and died in 2013. She was passionately committed to photo documentation as a way of life and a means to initiate social change. Her work took her from the streets of New York City to the anti-war protests of the Vietnam era, to villages of the working poor across the globe. For over 5 decades, Holt summered in Provincetown. She treasured the egalitarian nature of the town, where celebrated artists and writers mix easily with locals and developing artists. 2 books of portraiture resulted from her time on the Cape: Face of the Artist and On Equal Ground, photographs from an artist community at the tip of Cape Cod. We actually have this book for sale on Equal Ground in the bookstore, so I encourage you to pick one up tonight. Raymond Elman arrived in Provincetown in 1970. He made abstract art until 1989, when he invented a technique for making large-scale portraits to document his wife Lee's pregnancy and the birth of their son Evan. Elman then shifted focus to documenting his life in the art community by making portraits of many talented artists and writers he knew who embraced the Outer Cape. Since 1989, Elman has made more than 220 portraits, including those of Norman Mailer, Robert Motherwell, Stanley Kunitz, Alan Dugan, Annie Dillard, Mark Strand, Sebastian Younger, Alec Wilkinson, Varujan Bogosian, Bud Hopkins, Misha Richter, Al Jaffe, Lee Falk, Anne Bernays, Susan Orlean, Jhumpa Lahiri, Robert Pinsky, and Knox Martin. That's quite an impressive list. 4 of Elman's pieces are in the collection of the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery. He has served as a trustee officer of the Provincetown Art Association and Museum, as president of the Provincetown Group Gallery, as board member of the Wellfleet Harbor Actors Theater, and as co-founder, publisher, editor of Provincetown Arts Magazine. Jane Paradise is a Provincetown, Massachusetts photographic artist and is represented by the Galatea Fine Art Gallery in Boston. Her photographs have been featured and exhibited in solo and group shows throughout the U.S. and abroad, including the Griffin Museum of Photography, Art Space in Raleigh, North Carolina, Gallery Eva in Provincetown, Simmons College, the Houston Center for Photography, the International Biennial of Fine Art and Documentary Photography in Argentina and Spain, and the Gallery of Photography in Ireland. Her photographs are in public and private collections in the U.S. and Europe. She is a trustee of the Provincetown Art Association and Museum and former deputy director of the International Museum of Women. As well as co-curating this exhibition, she curated After Images by Amy Arbus at PAM in 2015. Paradise is working on an October 2016 group show in Berlin, Germany, and on a solo show in March 2017 at the Galatea Fine Art Gallery, focusing on the dune shacks of Provincetown. Paradise's photographs are published in the book Strength and Grace, Elegy for Love. Many of the photographs in that book are of Norma Holt. And we also have this book, which is a beautiful book on sale in the museum store. Ethan Cohen is an American collector and an art dealer based in New York City who specializes in contemporary Chinese and contemporary African art. He was one of the first Western dealers to sell work by contemporary Japanese and Chinese artists, including Ushio Shinohara and Ai Weiwei. He has been called one of the most influential art dealers in the world. Forbes praised his gallery as an exemplar in the field and putting on resplendent probing shows. Ethan Cohen Gallery was founded in 1987 as Art Wave's Ethan Cohen in Soho, New York City. It was the first gallery to present Chinese avant-garde of the Chinese avant-garde of the 1980s to the United States. Ethan Cohen Fine Arts today represents a diverse global mix of art, including contemporary American, African, Iranian, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Russian, Pakistani, and Thai, from emerging and established artists. And finally, last but not least, Executive Director Christine McCarthy, who will serve as the moderator for tonight's discussion, joined the Provincetown Art Association and Museum in 2001. She is responsible for all artistic, administrative, fiscal, and strategic directions of the largest presenter of Cape Cod art by national, regional, and international artists. PAM programs include art exhibitions, educational initiatives for children and adults, publications, lectures, and performances. Through her leadership, Pam completed a $5 million renovation and expansion project in 2006, was awarded Silver LEED certification as the first green art museum in the U.S., and received museum accreditation in 2009 by the American Alliance of Museums. In 2014, Chris spearheaded the 100th anniversary celebrations of PAM, including the acquisition of 100 notable collection artworks and the creation of a new collection catalog. Please help me welcome this wonderful group.
Thank you, Lynn, and thanks everybody for being here. And I just want to echo the thanks to John and Tony, who continue to underwrite this amazing lecture series. We've had some incredible speakers here, and we're hoping to continue to do so, so that we can document the legacy of the oldest continuous art colony in America, in fact, what Ray and Norma have done in this exhibition. What we're going to do is focus a little bit on the photography and the art as a message. Why are these people important? Why are they here? Why are we documenting them? Why is it so important that this continue to happen? A little bit about the curatorial process, because as you can see, this is a limited space, and based on what Lynn told you, there were hundreds and hundreds of pictures to choose from. Narrowing it down to what they chose was no easy feat, and I want to thank Ethan and Jane for that, because that is highly difficult, especially when you're dealing with living artists as well. Sorry, living artists, you're all wonderful. But to make those choices was very, very difficult, and I want them to talk a little bit about the process. And Ray's images, his art is photography, it's painting, it's collage, it's mixed media, to talk a little bit about his process as well, and taking a photograph, which today, especially with social media, Instagram, Facebook, all you do is see pictures. You see pictures, you're bombarded with pictures. Why are these pictures important in the grand scheme of Provincetown? What is the difference between documentary photography and fine art photography, portraiture, etc.? So my first question to the panel is, the power of an image is the power of its message. What is our message? Ethan, you can start.
Good.
They didn't get the questions in advance, you see.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of the power of the message. I would say that it's so exciting as a curator to look at two artists' artistic process and how they viewed the community, the people in the community, how they approached using the camera, how they approached using the camera and then printing out and then dealing with the surface. And I think that Norma, her photography is so sensitive and personal, and she was able to get into the studios and also so many people opened their lives to her. I think that some of the nude photos actually of Norma's, but each one is very special and has Norma's DNA on it. And I think that the Zimmerlis's work in the back, if you look at the actual contact sheet, it's so special. I've been in art for now over 30 years, and I thought, for me, my personal, I just love the contact sheets when Jane was sharing them with me, that Chris was so generous to open those images to us, and we spent an entire day looking through all of Norma's negatives or what we had, and seeing how Norma was open to experimentation, and even maybe accident. And she created something so beautiful in that contact sheet that you should really take a look at it. Because I think for me, in my history of collecting and appreciating art, it's such a privilege to have seen all these, but specifically that one I really like. But the power of the message, I think that Ray's work, I've always found fascinating. I've watched it from day one. When Ray started using photography and documenting our friends in this community, and maybe some of these people have passed, but they are here alive, and their legacy is going to go on for years and years to come. So that's one of the great powers and the beauty of being an artist, that your legacy, your works go on. So I think that that's also very special. I think Jack Kahn and Palmer, still alive, right there, fantastic, and I think that for me as a curator, and having grown up in this community and being an art professional, showing these images, the power of the image, I think that it shows the diverse types of artistic processes that people worked on, from sculpture and painting, photography, objects, writers, their distractions on the beach, even though I think that Ray and Norma caught them like playing poker, playing backgammon, showing these people as really human beings. I think that that's the dignity of each of these individuals. I think that's maybe the power of the image, maybe, for me.
Jane?
I think that both Norma Holt and Ray captured the spirit of the whole Outer Cape colony. So for me, it's the whole spirit of Provincetown and Outer Cape. And what you see here is a range of people, all walks of life, both all walks of the different artists in town. But they also include the artists, like down the end is a photograph of Anthony Sousa, who was a violin maker in town. Then we have Ione Walker, who was a gallery owner. You have Sebastian Junger, a writer. So for me, it captures the whole spirit of Provincetown, and all the people that are living today are breathing through our past. And this is the spirit of our past and present. Ray?
I arrived here in 1970 when I was 25 years old, and I didn't know a single person. And within a few years, I felt like I knew everybody, and it was partially because this community is so much more welcoming, especially to artists, than any other community I've participated in. And Chris Boos is here. In 1985, we co-founded Provincetown Arts. And when I shifted to making these paintings, Chris said, "Oh, you're just doing the same thing that we did with Provincetown Arts, except you've shifted to a different medium, and you're documenting the life of this colony through these portraits." And for me, part of the question was, I'd seen a lot of portraits, for example, Arnold Newman's portraits and Jane's portraits. I'm in her first book that she did in the 70s. And a lot of those are shot in the studio, showing the artist at work or doing something of that nature. And I wanted to approach it from a different perspective, which was, why do people come back here year after year? I wanted to document the fabric of life, the things that people do here besides work that makes them want to come back. So, Sebastian Junger is a surfer, and as far as I know, he still is a surfer. And I'm a surfer. When he was a teenager, I'm sure I was out in the water with him. I just didn't know who he was, and nobody else did either. The Murray Zimmerlis, I met because when I was living in New York, he partnered with a guy named Michael Kanigan, and they were master printers, and they did prints for some of the top artists of the time in the 60s and the 70s, and I bump into him in Provincetown when I come out there, and then I find that all these people have legacies connecting to one another. So Murray's uncle was Boris Margot, which is why he was here. And that image right there is standing next to his uncle's dune shack. So there's so many interconnecting things. And one other thing I'll add to it. When we started Provincetown Arts, the first few issues were tabloids and not perfect bound magazines. And I think a lot of people here remember B.H. Friedman, Bob Freeman, the writer. And he had just moved. Bob owned what was Joseph Hirshhorn's house, and it later became Norman Mailer's house. And Bob and Abby had moved from here to the Hamptons. So we asked him to write a piece comparing the Hamptons and Provincetown. And one of his lines in there that I quote all the time, and Chris, you can correct me if I get this wrong, is that in Provincetown there's sidewalk vitality and when the tide is out, there's constant traffic on the flats. In the Hamptons, everything happens behind tall hedges. So I think that's part of what happens here. And one of the things I'm finding, like right now, we moved to Miami Beach area a few years ago after being here for 43 years. And just walking down the street, it's like my life keeps coming down the street at me, and I keep running into people that I've known, like Dan Richter, since the early 70s. And so this is such a wonderful place because of that continuity, and that's what I'm trying to capture in this series.
You know, in that continuity, there's Boris Margot, Norma Holt's photograph of Boris Margot related to Murray and Martha.
And that's one of the really beautiful things about the show is that both you and Norma photograph the same people, and we know that there are probably lots of other photographers or artists that have depicted these same people. So let's talk a little bit about the choices. So for Jane and Ethan first, talk about how you chose the works for the exhibition, and then Ray, I'm going to ask you how you choose the people you choose to actually create the works of art. So you guys can start with that. Talk a little bit about your process on this, because it wasn't easy.
It wasn't easy. Yeah. So there were
because I'm alive.
Exactly.
Yes. So we have, well, for Ray's work, we looked at all of Ray's photographs on his website, because pretty much they're there, correct, Ray? So we went, a lot of them are there. Plus we had a PowerPoint presentation that Ray had sent us with suggestions.
Actually, I went down to Miami during Art Basel to meet with Ray and interview Ray and look at his work. And I've seen Ray's work since 1989, really growing up with it, and in the process. And having a conversation, so when Ray had suggested, we were talking with Brian Dunnigan and talking with Chris McCarthy, and then when Jane and I started to get together, we sort of thought about how do you tackle this, because there's so many images and the space is so limited. I mean, beautiful space, but we didn't want to jam it with so many images. We wanted to enliven the space. We wanted to make a dynamic in this space. And what's so beautiful is that Ray created a PowerPoint that is over in the corner behind you all that you can see, which really opens up to all his work and Norma's work, which is really wonderful, so that it includes that's right, but you were turning slightly, so it was still okay, decent. So we apologize in the sense that we couldn't include everybody. We actually, the real aesthetic choices that we had to make, we were trying to figure out works that spoke to both of us.
Yes.
And we tried to do it independently, not involving too much Ray, but Ray let us, and same with Norma. I mean, I think that we were trying to be fair. We wanted to have a balance. We wanted both Ray and Norma to have a conversation, visual conversation. We wanted, even though Ray's works are larger, we wanted to show Norma's works in a very professional way. So Jane blew them up slightly, a little bit larger. And when I came across the transparencies or the contact sheets, I was so fascinated, because I myself am a photographer, and I thought that you or everyone would be so interested in seeing those. So I said to Jane, why don't we put those on the wall so that everyone else could discover Norma's work too, and seeing how Norma chose which photographs. Maybe Norma, there were other works that were also interesting. And then Ray, we thought maybe Ray would do a contact sheets, but because of space limitation, it turned into the PowerPoint, and we included Norma. So we also were limited by the size of the room, and this wall comes out, but we wanted to, we didn't want to lose that wall if we put it away. So that the idea of suspending works, creating your own wall, and then also to the outside of the, I love this glass window, that's one of my favorite rooms of this museum, so that the outside, as people pass this space, you can interact with the exhibition 24/7, which is neat. And so at night it's fun to walk by, and then you're sort of curious what's in the museum. And so that was sort of behind.
Yeah, and in the daytime, you can come in and wander in and out of the photos.
Yes.
So you interact with them close up, you know, can be real close with Lee here.
That's actually, Jane, we were going to have 6 layers of smaller photographs of Norma's here, but it was a little too crowded. And so Jane made that smart decision to limit it to these numbers here so that you had enough room to discover. And I would encourage you, if you haven't walked, when there are not a lot of people in this room, circulate around the room and look at all the works from different angles. And I think one of the most delicious works in this exhibition is with a combination of something that Schiff and Bob Henry. If you go around the corner, you'll see Bob Henry's portrait by Ray, and I had never seen it so close. But because of the proximity of you, the viewer, and the work, you get this dynamic that Bob Henry is really there. And I experienced this with Bob the other night, and Bob said, yeah, it's a really nice painting. I wish I had painted it.
Thank you.
So it's fun. Discover this exhibition, because you can, it's fun. It's
And you start seeing different relationships between all the work here. So if you look at it from that corner, it's different than if you look at it from that corner. So moving around the space really gives you a different perspective on the photos and how they relate to one another, and how the people really occupy this space in this room.
And another interesting thing is that the Norma Holts, the ones that were chosen from the contact sheets are not necessarily the ones that are in the book either.
Yes.
So there were different people selecting the finals for the books as opposed to the exhibition, but the idea that you can see the other options just brings it more to life to see how many shots she did take of all these different people. So it really encompasses a huge amount of work, but placed so beautifully that you don't feel like it's overcrowded at all, which, thank you for doing that.
And Ray was doing very interesting, he was comparing how many actual individuals he photographed and Norma photographed the exact same people, and we were trying to put them together. And so we're producing now a actual book catalog for this exhibition, which will be another venue of experiencing visual imagery and of Norma and Ray coming together. So that's going to be very exciting, and we hope that'll be out in 2 weeks.
Great.
Yeah.
That's great.
And what's interesting about that is one of the ways the dynamic changes is because we're dealing with a I don't know what it is, 8 by something book. The images are the same size. So instead of mine being 5 by 6 feet, they're 8 by 10 inches.
Yeah.
And same with Norma, so they're
That's interesting.
One of the things that's coming to the forefront in this exhibition that I'm thinking about and I share with you all is the idea of the pixel, or digitization. And one of the things that I found fascinating as I'm a 55-year-old, art professional, curator, art dealer, collector, watching Ray's work and seeing his work evolve from really low-tech printing, where you were collaging onto a canvas and then painting into it. Sometimes a lot of paint into it, sometimes less paint. I think that the Joyce Johnson portrait has paint in it. The Zimmerlis portrait has maybe more paint. I think there's a lot of paint in the Joyce Johnson, but I feel it's very photographic. And then again, the Yucca portrait, or the portrait of your son on the other side here with the shaving cream, has so much paint in it. It's fascinating to see how you used photography and mixed it into your painting. And I think, and as we understand pixels and what is a pixel, and I actually have an exhibition in my gallery of a young graduate from Hunter who has invented the term post-analog pointillism, which is fun because when you look at the Doug Hubler work, there is a little bit more, I'd say, it's not as sharp, it's a little more pixel, has that quality, painterly feeling, and then the Norma photographs in the corner, much more intense. You almost say, when you look at the context, you have to take a magnifying glass, maybe even look at it. But so very dense pixels. So I think that's sort of interesting, and I think how we are all now photographers. We're with our iPhones, and so it's really fascinating. Really, one of the really things that really caught me was, this is something that I've been growing up with, and it's still in the process of, and we're all in the process of, and what a wonderful way to focus on this Outer Cape community. So that's sort of, it's an interesting conversation developing.
So why don't you talk a little bit about your process, Ray? Not only selecting the subjects of your works, but a little bit more about your process and how you actually create these.
Okay, well, let me start with the selection and then the process. In the late 60s, I hung up with Baba Ramdas in New York and up on his father's farm in New Hampshire. So when I came up here in the 70s, I had a carton full of Baba Ramdas tapes that I used to play for some of my friends, and they all thought I was a woo-woo lunatic. But I was really into Buddhism and when I first came up here. And so I had read Gurdjieff's Meetings with Remarkable Men, which is partially about the road to enlightenment and the people you meet along the way that influence and inspire you. So I translated that after becoming a hedonist in Provincetown. I translated that to this body of work. And so the first piece that I did was the piece of Jack Kahn and Palmer Williams, and I love both these guys dearly. And Jack had several sons. The oldest two were best men in Lee and I's wedding. Because we had two of them, we called them two decent guys instead of a best man. And I was best man in Terry's wedding, so we were really close to the family, and that felt. When I started doing this, the portraits felt more autobiographical because they were also about my life in this community and how I interact with the people in the community. And so in the case of Jack and Palmer, at some point in my life, they actually let me play backgammon with them. And so I used to do that as frequently as I could. And similarly with a lot of these people, they were not just prominent people in this community, but they were also my best friends. So that was part of the selection process. And then, you run out of best friends after a while. So then you start looking around and you say, well, who is having an impact here? And who are people that are important to document? And so for example, with Bob Rindler, I did a portrait of him, but, we didn't know each other that well. We had started to get to know each other, and so that's an example of somebody who's having an impact on this community in many ways, and I felt important to be part of the process. So the process itself, when Ethan said that it started off low tech, when I actually invented this process, it was because I thought I was going to give up painting. And our son was born in 1989, and it was a choice between Provincetown Arts and giving up painting. And So I did this series I called Death of a Muse, and it was tombstones in ancient burial grounds in Boston area with crossbones and skulls on them. And I started photographing those, and I had such little control over what I was doing because it was all new and I didn't really know what I was doing, but the outcome was pretty good. And somebody at Swansboro Gallery gave me a show of the work, and I got a lot of positive feedback on it. And in the beginning, digital cameras weren't practical yet. So I was literally printing 6x4-inch prints through Kodak or whoever, but not in any kind of major photographer kind of way where you go out and have some lab and spend a lot of money on the prints. It was just send them out and get them back. But I did have access to a $40,000 Canon CLC 500 color copier, which was brand new. And it turned out that built into that machine was a function that enabled you to enlarge an image to any size you wanted, and it would automatically tile it so the paper overlapped. I was using 11 by 17 archival paper, and the image was continuous tone printing. So it never pixelated. It might be a little blurry, but it never pixelated. So if you look at Jack and Palmer, or you look at Doug Hubler, which are amongst the first ones, there's no pixelation in it. And the other thing that I liked about it was it didn't look, when you got closer to it, it didn't really look like a sharp photograph. It looked more painterly, and I wanted to keep that quality. And ironically, as the technology got better, I kept on trying to degrade it so that it wouldn't look like a sharp photo. So that is kind of, the funny part is that the better it gets, the worse I try to make it. And then the rest of the process is, so I printed out on, say, one of these pieces that's 60 by 43 inches, I might print out 20 pieces of paper. I soak them in water. I adhere them to a canvas with a polymer medium, a plastic medium. So they're literally saturated in plastic, and they're kind of impervious. I mean, I've treated these pretty roughly. They don't even scratch unless you really work at it. And the other interesting thing, there's a big portrait I did of Lee and I on her 40th birthday, right? And it was a 5 by 6 foot painting that hung in direct sunlight in our house for 20 years, and it barely faded. So this process was pretty interesting from that standpoint. When the National Portrait Gallery took in my first piece, they were terrified that everything was going to fade. So they, put special glass on it. They put the canvases under glass. And then the rest of the process is, and then I use oil paint and paint on top of that, depending on what I want to accomplish.
And Jane, you had the privilege of knowing Norma. What can you tell us about her selection process or her photographic process? Because clearly these are way more than just a snapshot of people. They are absolutely elegant. The composition of these photographs is just spot on. Talk a little bit about that for us.
And I think she really did capture who the people were. And she knew most of the people, not everybody. She had a 35 millimeter camera. She got a grant, a CETA grant, in order to do these photos. One of her favorite photos is the photo behind in the window of Lena Gurr naked, sipping tea. So that was Norma's favorite photo. And when Norma went to photograph Lena, what Norma said was, gee, maybe I could photograph you in your underwear, trying to get something different, because she was always trying to pose people differently, to get a different angle, to really capture the spirit of the people. And what Lena Gurr said to her was, no, no, no. If I'm naked, then it's art. Otherwise, it's pornography if it's on. So Lena actually was the one in that case who volunteered to be naked, holding her coffee cup. Norma photographed Robert Motherwell in his studio, as well as portraits of him, and she